Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're going to be speaking with Idaho birding member Kestrel Roberts. And many of you have probably seen his photographs online at Idaho Birding. And I know I'd love them, and many of you do as well. So you may be wondering, how do you pronounce that name you saw? So Kestrel, could you talk a little bit about that? How do we pronounce your name?
Well, you pronounce it Kestrel, and it's obviously a Welsh name. I was born in Wales. Actually, I was born in a county called Ceredigion, so that's where my name came from the county. And Ceredig was a chieftain in Wales many centuries ago, and I used to live in this village called Llandewi Brefi, which is not easy to pronounce either. Not quite as long as one of the longest place names in Wales, but still quite difficult to say. And I lived there in that area for many years until I moved out to England and eventually to the US in 1989. And I always liked the outdoors, and I would hike up in the mountains around our house. One of my favorite birds was the red kite, which is very similar to the red-tailed hawk that we have here in Idaho.
Okay, so you were looking at birds early on then?
Yes.
Or noticing them?
Yes. At least the ones that were noticeable, which are the ones that, like the hawks, that fly and very visible. Maybe not quite so aware of those small birds that hide in the bushes and you never see them.
Did your interest in birding and photography coincide?
Yes, to some extent, because I got a DSLR camera in 2016, and that was the year I started birding more seriously and using my camera to try and help me identify what the birds were, because when I see them in the field, I could always identify with them with my binoculars or with my eye.
So that's interesting. So your photography became a tool for you to enhance your birding, to go back and look at it when you had a chance to magnify and blow it up.
Right, and I did start the eBird back in 2016, and of course I was terrified whether I'd identify the birds correctly, so I would study the pictures and try and get the right ID.
What did you notice about that experience? What kind of feedback did you get? Did you get any wrong and then get some feedback?
Oh yes, I mean there are some ones that you would have errors on. The Sharpshin and the Coopers was actually, I still have trouble with those two species even today.
Me too.
And some of the sparrows can be very misleading, especially when there's juveniles in the field as well as the adults. So so that took a little bit of researching to try and improve my ability in that area.
What suggestions might you have for people who are just beginning birders? Like right now we're shut in, we're looking out the window at birds. And how did you get started, and what would you recommend for others?
Well, I think you just need a lot of patience to get a good look at the bird. If you got a camera, take some pictures. And there are tools out there that give you hints on what the bird might be, like the Merlin app that you can put the picture in. If you have a reasonable picture, you can put it in and it'll give you some suggestions. That's always a nice tool. I remember I was at Blacks Creek once and I got a picture of this shorebird and I was very puzzled what it was. And I put it into the Merlin app and it came up with three suggestions, and one was a red knot. And I was thinking, wow, a red knot, that's sort of interesting. I wouldn't expect to see that. And then there are resources on social media, like for anything unusual, like Idaho birds sightings and discussions. And then there's also a social media site called What's This Bird, which you can put your bird on and get some advice and even Idaho birding people are very good at helping with. So I wouldn't be too shy in terms of asking people for help in terms of identifying the birds.
Okay. Did you notice you've improved quite a bit since you started?
It's definitely got better. And the other thing I've been trying to improve on to give you is hearing the sound of the bird and using that as a tool to identify it as well. That can be very useful.
Now did you take a class last year too from?
We did the Golden Eagle, I think, put together. I think it was Golden Eagle, or maybe it was Cyber, maybe a combination of Cyber and Golden Eagle put together of birding by ear. And so I took that last year. Yes.
Good. Did you find that was quite a help?
Yeah, it was good. It really got you attuned to trying to listen to the birds. And then I bought a CD which has some of the more common bird sounds. Quite often, it's useful to know all the common bird sounds, because then if you hear a different sound out there that's not on the common list, you're thinking, oh, what is that? Even if you don't identify it, you know, oh my goodness, there's something different out there. Okay. So that's a good tool.
Well, thank you. I think that'll be helpful, because I know a lot of people, again, they're inside and they're just now starting birding, and this has inspired them to get out and take a look at what's happening out there, so they can socially isolate and at the same time still appreciate and have some gratitude for what's around them with birds.
And there's lots of species in your backyard. I mean, I went through an exercise the other weekend, one afternoon, and said, okay, well, how many species am I going to be able to see just in my backyard here in the Boise Highlands? And it got up to a count of 18 species.
Wow.
Which is actually pretty good for just in the backyard.
And do you feed birds as well?
Yes, we feed them. Yes.
And you probably feed squirrels and other animals too.
Yes. I mean, try to come up with passions to stop the squirrels getting the food.
What a challenge! Yes. They're very tenacious characters. Yes. Okay, so you were kind enough to select a few of your favorite photos over the last couple of years, and let's go through them. And if you would, we'll highlight what you were learning as a birder, and also what you were learning as a photographer. So we found out that you got a camera, and then once you got the camera, you were using it to help you identify some birds. And then eventually probably something changed where you wanted to have better photos. I'm just imagining.
I mean, I started off with just a regular DSLR camera with a lens that went up to 105 millimeters. So was okay, but not great to get good shots of the birds. So then I upgraded to one that was up to 400 millimeters. And then more recently, just over a year ago, I got a 500 millimeter lens, which is the monster.
and you notice you're getting different quality of shots, and you're taking different shots than you would when you had the very small lens, right?
It's better quality. It works better in low light. The combination now, it's very fast at focusing, which is there's a few things that are key to getting shots of especially smaller birds that are moving around very fast. It has to be very quick at focusing. It has to be able to take multiple shots. So mine can take 7 shots a second, and I can keep the button down and take about 100 shots with the blink of the eye.
Wow.
So those are very good features of a good lens. This one was an incredibly cool shot to be able to get. It's taken at Blacks Creek Reservoir. And when I got into birding, I realized that Blacks Creek Reservoir was sort of a hot spot, one of the hottest spots in this area for birds. So I started visiting the area. And at first I was a little bit dismayed, because wherever I'd go, all the birds would fly away and I wouldn't get anything much. But then I realized that I had to be more stealthy and crawl through the mud and keep very low profile. And maybe even situate yourself in the mud somewhere and just be patient and wait. So these are 3 birds that arrive in Idaho in the summer. In fact, the one on the left is the black-necked stilt. I haven't seen that bird yet this year, although I'm sure now there's a time that they should be arriving here in Idaho. And they frequent Blacks Creek Reservoir a lot. The middle one was the bird that I was actually trying to photograph that morning. It's the long-billed curlew, and he's already in Idaho. I took a picture of one last week out south of Boise, and they frequent Blacks Creek quite often, and I think people have already seen them there this year. And then the one on the right is the American avocet, and again, they arrive in in this area here in the spring and stay through the summer, and also frequent Blacks Creek a lot in this time of year. In fact, I think somebody has seen one already this year at Blacks Creek.
And Craig, just for the listeners who might not know, the viewers, these Blacks Creek Reservoir is southeast of Boise.
Right, it's sort of exit 64 on the freeway as you were heading southeast out of Boise, yes, and it's about 3 or 4 miles from that exit.
You said that this is a challenge because you have to get up to the birds and they're quite far away. So you end up having to adopt a kind of stealthy way of doing things, and which was crawling in mud, keeping a low profile, and then also just sitting and waiting for the birds to come to you once you're in position. Is that correct?
Yes, and sometimes they will fly in front of you if you're staying still. And in this case here, my goal was to get a nice picture of the long-billed curlew. And as I was pointing my lens at this species, the other two birds suddenly walked by, and they situated each other perfectly in a row here. And I really like this picture because you've got the stilt with a straight beak, the curlew with a down, and the avocet with a pointy up beak. And just the colors came out really well on it. And it was such a cool picture to take. And since that day, I've never had the chance to see all three of them like this together. So it was probably a unique moment.
And it was probably sometime in the summer.
I'm not sure of the date. This is probably, I would guess, earlier, probably late spring. Because these birds, all three of these will be there by April. By May, quite a large number of these around. So I suspect this was in May.
Let's look at our next one.
Okay, so this is one taken more recently, also at Blacks Creek Reservoir. The white-faced ibis, although it doesn't show a lot of white on its face, but that's the name, the white-faced ibis. They've got this iridescent green color on their wings. Sometimes it's even more pronounced than this. This was taken sort of early in the morning. I think it was a little bit overcast, but not too much, which is actually good not to have too much light. At Blacks Creek, the east shore of the lake is good in the morning because the light's coming behind you, and that's very important to help enhance the picture and give that clarity to it. So you're always looking as a photographer to have the light behind you. Although, to be fair, you can sometimes get some pretty cool effects with lights coming at you through the bird as well, when sometimes they sort of highlight the beak in a sort of a nice way. But this bird, again, is another bird that visits us over the summers in Idaho. I'm not sure exactly what dates these arrive. I'm not aware of anybody reporting them yet, so maybe a little bit later than the other three that I showed earlier. And in this case, actually, I was with another birder when I took this picture, and I had just taken my first ever picture of a barn owl at Blacks Creek that morning, and then I was walking towards the reservoir and was sitting still waiting to see what was going to happen, and then 10 of these ibises flew over my head and landed in the water in front of us, and I was able to take a lot of shots, and I was looking to see if I could get a shot of them with their profiles all looking the same way, because they tended to be moving their heads and they weren't all lined up. And out of about the 100 shots I took, this was the only one that had them lined up like this. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's neat. And as you said earlier, a couple of things that are extraordinary about this photo. The one is that the light is such that you can see great detail in the feathers without that blowing out. And so that you can see the color and the detail of the feathers. And then also the catch light in each of their eyes. So
yes.
The eyes are in sharp focus. The pose is the symmetry of the pose, like you said, is just gorgeous image.
It's nice to get that little glint in the eye. I had a conversation with somebody online a year or so ago, and he would say, well, if you get the glint in the eye, that makes a perfect shot of the bird. You always have to see if you can get that glint in the eye.
All right. Tell us about this shot, this image.
Okay, the mountain bluebird, which is of course the state bird of Idaho, and I've really enjoyed taking pictures of these mountain bluebirds, and because you can see them close to Boise actually as well. This was taken at a place called Adams Gulch, just north of Ketchum. It's about trail in Adams Gulch, a number of trails in that gulch along the creek there, and I always like to visit that area. Actually, this time of year, so mid-March to the end of March into early April. Unfortunately, this year I have not gone to Blaine County because a few days before we were planning to go this last month, they shut the place down, so we decided not to go. But the mountain bluebirds do arrive there, usually around between 16th of March and the end of March in that time period. And there's still usually, there can be quite a bit of snow still on the ground, but they're the first sort of birds to arrive in that area that have, the ones that arrive in the spring. They are early arrivers in that area. This pair here, I've seen them several years now in a row. Their nest was in a tree that unfortunately collapsed one winter with a storm. So they've obviously found another nest. I actually also put a bird box in the area, hoping that they would use the bird box, because it was a special bluebird box that I purchased and put it there for them. But unfortunately, they never found it, and the tree swallows have used it every year since I put it up. But I really like this picture because you can see that the male has caught this bug. Actually, I have a shot that I think somebody who's good at insects would identify the bug. It's because it's quite luminescent from one angle. The mountain bluebird male is feeding it to the female. And I'm not sure if this is part of the courtship ritual or why he's feeding her, but I've seen this several times that the male will feed the female.
And when you were out looking for bluebirds, what's the habitat like, and where do you see them usually?
They like to have some open ground where they can fly over and catch insects. So they're not in, they're usually on sort of slightly drier slopes where there's a little bit more open ground around them. That's where I see them up in the Ketchum area. And of course, the other areas that you will see them, because they depend a lot. Obviously, this pair had a cavity in a tree, but a lot of the mountain bluebirds depend on these mountain bluebird boxes that a lot of people have put up. There's the mountain bluebird trails with all these bluebird boxes, and actually a road that you will see, guarantee in the spring, see a lot of bluebirds is Mountain Bennett Road, which is sort of east of Mountain Home and then comes out just at the top of Cats Creek Summit. And if you take that road as a dirt road, there's quite a lot of bluebird boxes on that road, and you will see, I usually count at least 25 bluebirds when I drive that road in spring.
How about this gorgeous image?
Well, this is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. He was actually born in the nest just behind our house, and he was hanging around, still getting fed by his parents. We were lucky enough last year to have the red-tailed hawk's nest in a pine tree just behind our house. So from our upper deck, you could look down and just about see the nest. And I was able to put a telescope in my bedroom and have a few shots taken every hour during the days, and I was able to go back and look at the pictures and was able to identify that this bird was born on May 2nd of 2019, and was able to watch it develop in the nest from a little white chick starting to get its colors. He was pretty much spot on in terms of the time from the time he hatched to the time he flew. I actually got a picture of him taking his first flight. I was out with my coffee, and I'd seen him on the branch the night before, thinking about it, and I couldn't believe it. The next morning I get up, and as the sun comes up, he's still there, and I was able to get him taking his first flight out And that was 41 days after he was born. He took his first flight. And then he stayed around. I think they were around for at least a couple of weeks in the area, and you could see the parents come in and bring him food. So he would get food from his parents, and then eventually they went somewhere. I don't know where. I don't know how far away the red-tailed hawks go from where they were born. They obviously have to find some territory somewhere. So I don't know where this little chap is now, but he's obviously gone. And then the parents are using the same nest again this year. Of course, we're in early April right now. The female is on the nest. I've seen her on there, and I've seen the male bring in some food. So I don't know if the eggs are already there and she's sitting on them or not. But I expect to see some new chicks here early May.
Did this bird have any siblings?
One sibling, yes. There was two of them. On May 2nd, I definitely saw one chick and then both of them. So I don't know if they were spaced apart by hours or was there a whole day between them being born, but they must have been pretty close. They were both about the same size as they developed. So I've taken lots of pictures of the American Kestrel, and this one is as he's launching out here, and you can see the nice features of his wings and his claws. I think this was taken in Hull's Gulch, I think. There's quite a few in that area. You know, one of the things that I enjoy doing is getting birds in flight, and you have to be a little bit more careful with the setting on your camera in terms of making sure that you've got a fast enough speed. I usually have it in sort of a semi-manual mode, the camera. So I always use an f-stop if I can, if the light is good, of like f8, which is the sort of the prime sweet spot of the lens that I have.
So that gives it a lot of enough depth of field so that you're going to get the bird in sharp focus.
Yeah, it's a good depth. It's a reasonable depth of field. Obviously, it's about double depth of field typically from the largest f-stop or f4 of the lens. But it's also the sweet spot. The lens performs best at f8. Then I just basically, depending on the light, set the ISO high enough so the shutter speed is fast enough for these type of shots. You want to be at 0.002 of a second or better for anything that's sort of moving to capture them really sharply. And the ISO on the sensor I have on my camera is nice. It'll take pretty decent pictures, even at an ISO 4000. So you can be pretty tolerant.
For this particular, you talked about camera settings. How about the approach or the strategy that you use as a photographer to get in position and get ready for a shot like this? What do you do? What's your approach?
Well, you always obviously try and get the light behind you. And I think this was a little bit overcast that day, but there was still enough light. I can see the glint, a little bit glint in the eye here on this bird. So there was just about enough light here. So you try and get the light behind you. Birds in flight are tricky because they're, like northern harriers, for example, they'll bank and twist. And so you'll end up having to take a lot of shots because depending on where the light's coming from, depending on which way the bird is banking as it's flying, can change how good the shot is quite significantly. So you'll end up having to take a lot of photographs to try and get one that's got the right positioning and the right focus. And also, it's very easy to lose focus on a bird that's moving. And there are some features on my camera that can help. Typically, I just use a spot focus, but it can sometimes be tricky to get the spot on the bird that's flying because you've got to move pretty fast, and with a big lens, it's hard to move it. So there is a more of an automatic one, which uses, I think it's the Canon camera I have has about a large number of focusing spots, and you can put it into a mode where that if it hits any of them, it'll use that to focus. And it's sort of a more of an automatic system. And I've used that on some prairie falcons flying because the prairie falcons are super fast. The toughest one I've seen to get shots in flight, and I still haven't got a good shot of it, is I think it's called a white-throated swift. Mm-hmm. And those are really, really difficult because they move fast and they also are very erratic. They'll move suddenly change direction very abruptly, while some of the hawks are a little bit more predictable. So yeah, so that's definitely challenging. Birds in flight are not easy.
Yeah, and I found that a good practice for birds in flight is to take photos of some of the ring-billed gulls that we see
Yeah.
here locally, because they're slow, they float down. You got plenty of time to set your shot up. You know where they're going to land. So
Yes.
it's an easy practice bird. The challenge there is their plumage is white, and if you got a sunny day, you have to be very careful because that can just blow out, and it's just becomes an angelic white blob.
Yeah, so that's actually a good segue about white birds, because white birds tend to over saturate your sensor. Typically on those birds, you can have a setting on your camera that will force the exposure to be higher or lower. And on those white birds, you always want to force it at least a stop down, or maybe a stop and a third or stop and a half down from what the camera thinks it should be taking it at. Some examples are like the swans, the great egrets, a couple of good examples that you'll oversaturate the sensor with a white bird. And then on the other hand, when the dark birds like the crows or the ravens, you want to actually move the exposure setting and force it a little bit over, because they'll come out too black otherwise.
Then you got those birds that are really frustrating, where they have a lot of contrast built in. So they are both black and white. Mergansers are one.
Yes.
Common merganser, male common merganser, that's a big challenge. Or a bufflehead.
The hooded merganser.
Hooded merganser is another. And so then you've really got to play with exposure and make sure the lighting is right there, because it's a challenge.
I think I find with those birds which have got both dark and black, it's best to go and underexpose them a little bit, because the white overexposure is hard to manage when you process the picture afterwards. It's much easier to bring out shadows and darkness than to get rid of over white areas.
All right, so let's take a look now at your next one.
Well, this Virginia rail, it's a tough bird to get a picture of, because they're always hiding in the reeds. And the nice thing is, or frustrating thing is, you can always hear them, and they have very distinctive calls, and you can play the calls, and they'll call back to you. For many visits to these areas with these Virginia rails, where I would hear them and I could never find them. I kept on thinking that there were other birders in the area behind me calling them, and all I was hearing was the other birders calling them, and there was no bird there. So I could never see the bird. The bird never seemed to be there. This year I've had better luck with them. Maybe I've got more patience. I don't know.
Where and when was this one taken, Kestrel?
So this one was taken about a month ago, maybe a little bit more, at Silver Creek Preserve. I was with another birder from the area. You might have heard her name, Pooh, and she lives in the Haley Ketchum area. And we'd organized to visit Silver Creek together and have a birding morning. And it was pretty cold. There was actually ice in many parts around these marshy areas. And I think there's a pair of Virginia rails. A lot of Virginia rails move into our area in the spring and summer. I'm wondering if these Virginia rails in that area are there all year round, because it was still pretty cold. Anyway, we were able to hear them, and they have these little bridges there that you can stand on that go across these marsh areas. So it's a great place to get pictures of marsh wrens. Anyway, we heard these two Virginia rails, and a couple of times the Virginia rail would come out, and he would see us, and he would run and skip across the ice and as quickly as he could and disappear. And eventually I realized that he was under one of these little pontoon bridges there, and we waited until he came out. So I knew he was going to come out on the left side, and he came out, and the light was just perfect. We just situated ourselves in the perfect spot to get this shot. And I think Boo actually, I sent her the picture and she's made a painting of it. So there's a painting up in Haley of this bird that because she's a great artist, so she made a painting of it.
Are you using eBird whenever you go out to photograph and bird? Are you eBirding at the same time?
Yeah, I do, but I use the app on the phone. 3 pieces of equipment that I always take is my camera, my binoculars, and my phone, so that I can record the lists of birds that I'm seeing. It helps me keep track of what I'm seeing, and I'm able to attach the pictures to the eBird list later in the day when I get back home. So yeah, it's good to track. And also eBird is a great resource. It tells you what birds can be expected to be seen in any particular location, when birds are going to arrive in an area, when they're going to leave, and all sorts of really good information about the birds.
Well, Kestrel, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today and for sharing beautiful photos and your experiences. And I look forward to seeing you on the other side again out there in the field and birding and photographing with you.
Yeah, thank you for the interview. Yeah, it was fun. And yeah, good luck to all those birders and photographers out there. It's just a lot of birds to be seen in Idaho.